Welcome back in the Blue Theater. So we're about to dive into some cutting-edge research in this session, which they have rather provocatively named Our Machines, the Research Participants of the Future. But for this, we have a very cool, all rock star, all-female panel of speakers. Very proud to introduce. So we're going to hear from Dr. Fatima Koaik, who's the Behavioral Science Director of the Ideation Center of Strategy and Middle East. She's among the first behavioral scientists in the MENA region, and she has deep interest into how AI can be integrated in behavioral science and research. We will hear from BSG's very own Rasha Attar, who is the director of the Behavioral Science Group hosting this conference within the Office of Development Affairs here in Abu Dhabi. Rasha is leading research at the BSG on how AI, among many other things, on how AI can be used to create simulated participants to predict attitudes and intervention outcomes using the UAE's AI model Falcon. Both are, and this is where the third speaker comes in, both are alumni of the Executive MSc in Behavioural Science at the London School of Economics. And so to moderate this discussion, we have Professor Barbara Fasolo, who co-designed the Executive MSc in Behavioural Science. Welcome to all of you. And then I'll hand over the floor to you, Barbara.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. Now, warm welcome to this panel that combines two themes that we've seen really at the forefront of the conference so far. One is AI, and the other is education. And I'm in education especially. My name, as I said, is Barbara Fasolo, and about 10 years ago, in 2014, in collaboration with a number of colleagues at the London School of Economics, we thought to design a program, an executive program, a master's program, 16 months long, that taught people like Rasha and Fatima, that came from very different walks of life, how to become even more expert in behavioral science. So what I thought I'd do at the start is to tell you a little bit about this program, because really the work we're going to be presenting was also thanks to that training, cutting-edge training in research methods, some quite tough, right, that you took. So whatever we're presenting, you could be doing too after that training. So I'll now give you this very brief introduction. Oh, that's a video, not the... But anyway, let's start with a video, guys. That's Dario, PhD advisor of Fatima. That's a QR code. Oh, it should be a QR code at the end. If you are interested, Goja, where are you? There you go. So she's our exec program manager. For those of you who were alumni in the program and had a different director, she's our new Therese. She's fantastic. She's got information, so if you're curious, please do reach out to her. We're having drinks today for alumni. And if you were to join, basically you join a community of 500 plus behavioral scientists that are really at the forefront of the science. And they would know all of the frontier models, frontier methods in the science. There are about 30 alums of the program with us these 2 days. And some of you are here. Raise your hands if you are. Good to see you guys. We meet every July, hence that kind of very summary look over there for a reunion where alumni talk about what they've been doing during the year. So that's also very good. The faculty is very broad. You had Dario in the video. He's the one who teaches with Matteo Galizzi AI, the coolest kind of latest technology work. So every year, what he's taught is different because now the pace of AI is so different. So it's a very tough job to teach on this program because we have to keep abreast of what's happening. And of course, you know, also some stars in here. You see Liz Costa. I don't know if she's here, but she's around. Yes, saw you earlier. So you can say what you do, but we really work together with the BIT and all the experts in the field. So if you're interested even to participate as guest speaker, please do reach out. That's all of us there, and you can scan if you want the code to get to know more about it. But what I want to also say is that Rasha and Fatima really exemplify two very different profiles of people who come to a program. Rasha, you will say, but basically she came already after a long experience. She was already tasked with a very important job, and you wanted a certificate or something to show that actually she already knew lots of the stuff, but hopefully we helped you a little bit. And she is part of the last cohort. This is a cohort that is ending now. She's holding her breath on her grades. We don't know them yet. We don't have them released. And then we have Fatima, Dr. Fatima Koaik, who started with 4 years experience, then worked for 10 years, and then came back to us and did a PhD with Dario. And that's the work you're presenting today. Oh. So it's really an honor. And for us, it's the most fun course to teach because we learn so much from you guys. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say about that. Now, without further ado, what we'll do is about 10 minutes for each of the contributions of Rasha and Fatima, and then we'll have a panel discussion. And we'll ask questions that hopefully are going to be relevant for all of us. So I think you've already learned a bit about our first speaker, Rasha. I mean, really, I just want to say you're a mastermind. I don't know the bandwidth and cognitive ability. Clearly, all of the research I have done on choice overload and bounded rationality does not apply to you. Because so far, she has done already 3 sessions since the morning. I don't know how many yesterday, but she has everything. And she's always in charge. So what can I say? She's been a delight, and I can do quickly to remind you, advisor of the Presidential Court, over 17 years experience, research and policy, so that's what we're going to see in her presentation. She drives positive change across themes such as sustainability, digital well-being, health, education, and social cohesion, not just one theme. And she's built an amazing dynamic cross-disciplinary team. I've been very lucky to be invited to those events. And really, it's really hard to leave, although I always complain about something because that's me. I'm the morning teacher. But she's really strong advocate, and it's been a really great delight to meet you, and look forward to hearing you speak. So please join me in welcoming Rasha to the podium.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Barbara. It's a pleasure to be sharing the stage with you and Dr. Fatima. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this session, and welcome to day 2 of BX 2025. Today, I'm very excited to share with you findings from a recent project that we just completed in collaboration with AI71 and TII. We explored how AI-generated synthetic participants could augment the work done by behavioral scientists and policymakers alike. So, what do we mean by synthetic participants? They can be understood simply as AI-generated proxies to simulate how real people might think or even behave. They're based on real demographic data and attitudinal data and can be prompted to answer survey questions and even respond to behavioral interventions. The research in this space is new, but it's rapidly evolving. We think our project helped advance it in a few ways. First, we created a large sample of synthetic participants representing the UAE population, a highly diverse, non-weird group. Most research to date has focused on Western populations, with a rare but notable exception being the work done by my excellent colleague, Dr. Fatima. Much discussion has been previously around broadening behavioral research beyond just weird samples, and this notion extends to even synthetic participants. Second, we simulated opinions to questions of national interest. But we also moved beyond attitudes. We tried to replicate behavioral outcomes leveraging real data with previous BSG experiments. Most research to date has focused on attitude alignment, but ultimately, behavioral science is about understanding behaviors so that we can change them in positive ways. So for all of this, we used Falcon. Falcon is a locally developed and leading open source large language model, rather than relying on the Western models like ChatGPT. To the best of our knowledge, our project is the first study to use Falcon to generate synthetic participants reflecting the UAE population. So, why did we do this? Synthetic participants hold much potential for behavioral science. Today, most research still relies on traditional surveys or experiments, which are costly, and data collection can be quite slow, as I'm sure most of you know. Synthetic participants could offer a new tool, especially in early stages of policymaking, by quickly checking public sentiment or shortlisting interventions that seem promising before we move into the field trials. So what we've called this is synthetic pre-testing. Let's look at how we created synthetic participants. Let me walk you briefly through our project flow. First, we selected key variables from previously collected BSG data. These were used to create two types of synthetic participants, one based on a simple demographic prompt and another that used a detailed narrative or pen portrait. I'll talk more about each in just a second. We then asked the participants questions in simulated experiments to create outcome data of interest. The pen portrait method involved generating what you can think of as a brief but detailed narrative sketch. The Falcon AI was then prompted to answer questions as if it were that person. The idea, as explored in other early studies, is that the more holistic information or context for the AI to consider, you improve predictive accuracy. So here's an example to make the method more clear and more concrete. We compared this pen portrait approach with a simpler approach. Here, we just prompted the model directly using demographic data. This method was comparatively quicker and less computationally intensive. We therefore were curious to see how accuracy might actually differ between the two prompting strategies. We evaluated accuracy for opinion in two ways. First, using visual side-by-side comparison of human and synthetic responses. This was our intuitive sense check to see if our approach was actually promising. Second, we created a quantitative metric based on the Jensen-Shannon divergence, which is simply a statistical measure of similarity between synthetic and real distributions. So in our case, the scores that are closer to 1 meant better alignment. Now, for experimental data, we looked out to see if synthetic participants could identify the correct rankings of treatments. As practitioners, we are often interested in identifying the ideas that hold the most promise before scaling them more widely. We also looked at the relative effect size to see if we could get a sense of the impact size to expect. All right, so question 1. Let's see how we did simulating attitudes. In many cases, the synthetic data looked really similar to real responses. So for example, when we asked whether AI would mostly be helpful or harmful to people, and that's a question on many minds right now, synthetic and human responses were very, very well aligned. That's a promising start. What about views on actual policy? On live policy topics like plastic bag bans here in the UAE, synthetic participants again tended to tell the same story. In short, most people support the policy. But synthetic participants sometimes exaggerated the strength of the views. So note that the purpose of this research is not to scrutinize any policies, but rather to quickly generate an understanding of how UAE residents may feel about proposed interventions. We were also really interested in identifying areas where this approach may perform less well. Interestingly, climate-related questions proved to be more difficult to replicate accurately here. So for example, here, synthetic participants underestimated how many people are willing to make major lifestyle changes to fight climate change, but they overestimated the willingness to make some changes. So other studies have claimed to find a pro-green bias with AI models. So this therefore represents an area that's worth exploring further. this unpredictability in measure. Notably, for other researchers, we surprisingly found no accuracy benefit for the pen portrait approach, which was relatively more computationally and time-intensive. So this has methodological implications. Why? Because as consensus regarding the best ways to create synthetic audiences or synthetic samples is not yet established. And so in doing so currently is as much an art as it is a science. Now, beyond attitudes, how did we do trying to replicate behaviors from experimental data? We tried to replicate the results of an online experiment that the BSG has actually run. For example, we ran one back in October 2023 with 4,500 participants. Here, we tested 5 different messages to encourage participants to raise their AC temperature, framed around the UAE's national vision, health, and ease. Here, the results were more mixed. Let's break them down. Generally, synthetic participants showed strong alignment with real-world rankings. In other words, the synthetic results could tell us which interventions worked best and which worked less well. However, synthetic participants overestimated how well the messages would perform, often by a large margin. So this graph represents the broader pattern we observed. As a fun but practical case study, we compared these results with predictions made by experts and practitioners working on the project before the experiment ran. Could synthetic participants beat expert intuition? What do you guys think? Well, none of the human experts correctly identified the top performer. Although 3 thought the health message would be best, it turned out it was the least effective. And on the other hand, synthetic participants correctly identified the top 3 interventions. So obviously, this is just one single case study, but it illustrates a broader point. So when judging the usefulness of this approach, an open question is, what are you comparing it against? To wrap up, I have 3 key takeaways. First, synthetic participants showed real promise in simulating attitudes in a non-weird population. Great start. And this as a whole represents a large gap in the early research to date. Second, behavioral predictions were more mixed. We saw some signs of promise, but much work is needed to be done in this area. And third, and which is worth stating explicitly, is real testing remains essential. We imagine synthetic participants could rapidly test and filter ideas before field trials, augmenting rather than automating the work done by behavioral scientists and policymakers. So in this way, we view this approach as a potential new tool to the behavioral toolkit. Thank you.
I look forward to discussing a bit about the differences between machine and human, which we started talking about yesterday. It was very fascinating, the AI session, if you were there. Now, second speaker, Dr. Fatima Koaik. She was the second cohort, 2015, when we were still trying to find our feet. And the last time I saw Fatima, we were in Lebanon, BX Lebanon, and I had a small child who was taking me, following me everywhere. So I remember how friendly she was to Mattia, and thank you for that. But anyway, she was the first behavioral scientist, I think, in the region, or one of the first, and definitely one of the first alumni. And since then, you've done more than 50 different behavioral interventions and experiments and diagnostics. And when you started, you were just starting, 4 years experience, and now you have lots more, and a PhD that you're going to tell us about. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Fatima Koaik to talk about her work.
Thank you, Barbara. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry for my voice. I lost it yesterday. I think I was so excited to see many familiar faces. So please bear with me, and I really apologize for not sounding that great. First, I would like to thank the BSG and Rasha specifically. I was telling her now how proud I am of her, of establishing all of this and bringing us all together, especially in Abu Dhabi and the UAE. So Rasha, thank you so much. I'm also very happy to be speaking. I'm very proud to be speaking here on this panel with Rasha, because we are two Arab behavioral scientists and not presenting a typical behavioral science research. We're actually advancing a bit, and I'm very proud. So beyond weird, since I have my voice, I thought I'll skip some sentences, but I won't, since it's coming back. Yesterday, a colleague of mine said, when we entered the conference, we will hear AI and weird a lot. And I said, oops, my presentation is beyond weird, how can AI augment behavioral research? And this is a study that I didn't do in my PhD, actually. I can share with you more later on my PhD. It's a study we did with Dario and May with the Ideation Center. So it's a study at the Ideation Center, and I thank the team for this. Rasha made it so easy for me to start this presentation, but just maybe a few seconds on why synthetic participants and why in behavioral research. First, for behavioral scientists in the room, and you are too many, especially applying this in the region, you know the struggle. The struggle in collecting data from participants, the struggle in recruiting participants, the cost of recruiting participants, and how time-intensive or resource-intensive it is for us to actually collect them. And last but not least, there's still the culture. We miss the culture of data collection in the region, so it comes with its own biases. So synthetic participants is the solution. So it's an artificial entity to every human participant that could maybe predict behavior, predict attitudes, and beliefs. But we didn't reinvent the wheel in our study, right? LLM models have been applied around the world so far in different contexts, but not for behavioral research. So what Rasha and I are presenting today is something also very new to the literature. So it has been applied mostly on psychological processes rather than actual behavioral interventions. And what we could also see here is that there is low representation from the region, specifically from the GCC. One last point before I press next. The more culturally distant we are from the United States, the less the correlation is between ChatGPT and the human participant, and we'll speak more about it in a bit. So we initiated last year the first AI study using ChatGPT. So we used ChatGPT 4 back then. And we aim to answer three main questions. First, the regional validity. Can AI help us predict human behavior in the GCC or in the MENA region? Second, policy consistency. We really wanted to know, is it like hazard where actually we can consistently predict behaviors across different policy areas? And we chose three in our study. And last but not least, and most exciting for everybody, can we predict intervention effectiveness? Can we predict this before going in the field or without going in the field? And we'll speak more about it in a bit. So we focused on three policy areas. We've been very busy working across different government areas in the region. And we picked three that are not encompassing all the policy agenda, but they are top on policymakers. Female labor participation. We wanted to see the difference between weird and non-weird countries, financial literacy, and of course, sustainability. We sampled participants from 3 countries. We used USA as a control kind of group just to compare weird versus non-weird, and we used a sample from KSA and UAE. So for every 300 human participants, we matched them with another 300 synthetic participants. But we didn't also, similar to Rasha's approach, we didn't also only stop at actually ask attitudinal questions. We also pushed the needle to run 3 behavioral experiments in this study. I will not have a slide on the approach because I think it's very similar to Rasha. So we ran the survey, we ran the experiments, then we prompt ChatGPT on an AI model to replicate synthetic responses. Just to give you a quick teaser on what are the experiments. The first one is labor market and on vignette scenarios. So yesterday, the World Bank were walking us through social norms. This is a typical social norm vignette experiment, where we gave participants a hypothetical scenario on Sarah, who just got her child and contemplating going back to work. Participants were randomly allocated into 4 groups, and every group received different scenario of social expectations and social norm. In financial literacy, simpler design, control and treatment. What we try to do here is to test future mindset approach to improve saving, investing, and spending. I'm rushing a bit, but because I want to show you the results. In sustainability, also a very typical carbon emission task from the literature, so also a very simple design. Gave them the hypothetical scenario of buying a $150 ticket to spend their vacation, and they have the chance to offset their CO2 emissions by paying between $0 and $10. And by the way, this is also something I've studied in my PhD. This is not common to offset your CO2 emissions. And hold until you see how our people in the GCC responded. In the treatment group, we just nudge them with a simple social norm. 80% of passengers taking the flight are actually donating around $8. In the control, no message. Overall, and I'm very happy to see that this is also aligned with Rasha's and the BSG's study, overall, 0.76 is the alignment. From 0 being completely random to 1 being completely perfect, our study was actually positive. Anything beyond 0.5 we consider to be strong alignment. We tried to look at 3 different countries. So as you can see, the 3 of them have positive alignment. USA is leading the way, followed by UAE, and then KSA. But then we also asked ourselves, if we run the model differently, if we have Fatima as a human participant, if we tell synthetic participant that Fatima is very good in math, would she perform better in the financial literacy test? So we prompted them with extended traits, but also similar to what Rasha presented, this did a bit more poorly, and for now, ChatGPT, I think, would be fine with basic traits. But then the big question here, does AI actually act irrationally? And can we predict this irrationality by understanding susceptible biases? I won't bore you with difficult biases here. I chose 2, positive and negative bias. Just to explain quickly, if Fatima is a human participant and Fatima is a synthetic participant, in a positive bias, the synthetic version of Fatima will overestimate how much the human Fatima will actually donate for CO2, will support a specific policy, or will engage in a behavior. And quite the opposite for the negative bias, where the synthetic participant will underestimate our support to specific policy. So in general, overall, we have positive results where all countries experience positive bias overall. But as we move away from USA to non-weird countries, this bias becomes smaller, and we can see in KSA that the negative bias is bigger. But this is not super negative, because we also use a ChatGPT-4 who's based on Western data, and we'll speak more about it. How would the picture change when we look at different policy areas? I'll spend 2 seconds on this slide just to show you that under sustainability, Saudi residents and citizens are more likely to donate, are more likely to support sustainable policies, but ChatGPT thinks the opposite. So this is just how you could see what was really driving the negative bias in KSA. But I want, before I end, just walk you through the sustainability experiment, because it gets a bit interesting. So remember, a scenario. You bought $150. You have a chance to donate between $0 and $10. Treatment group would just nudge you with 80% social norm intervention, and the control, nothing. In the baseline, first I'll start with the control group. How did the human participants in KSA, UAE, and USA responded? American citizens responded by donating 4.9, whereas UAE and KSA were more likely to donate. Okay, this is just to control human participants. How did ChatGPT react to this? In USA, it was most likely that the difference between synthetic and human participants is very low, so it's almost kind of good prediction. But with UAE and KSA, you see the difference is quite big. It underestimated, and this is a result of the negative bias, it underestimated how we support sustainability, or we're more likely to donate. And this is also how the treatment effect worked. And this is, I will just stop for 2 seconds here. Look what happened in USA. When American citizens were told that 80% are paying $8, they were less likely to donate. It backfired. And this is another prediction that synthetic participants couldn't predict. AI or ChatGPT predicted that they will actually donate more. So it wasn't able to predict the backfire effect. And we'll speak more about these solutions or these instances in the discussion. Whereas in the UA and KSA, it was able to predict the same kind of magnitude in the effect size. So yes, ChatGPT is good, but it's not that good, and we'll speak more about it. What are the policy implications? First, we're not saying that the picture is so rosy. It's good, it's a good start. It's one of the first studies we're presenting today. It's still the beginning, but we don't recommend at this stage to actually use ChatGPT for policy design and replace human participants. So for early testing, yes. To run specific behavioral diagnostics, yes. To just give us a gist on where we're going in terms of behaviors, yes. But for actual policy decisions and policy designs, we still need the human precision here. And before ending, and of course, we need to be aware of the bias. Simple prompting now for ChatGPT 4 would be enough. But before ending, I want to end on one note. Remember behavioral economics when it came to life 10 or a couple of years, maybe more than a decade ago? What was groundbreaking is the application is bringing human back to economics, is bringing behavior back to economics. This sounds so cool, but I'm just mindful as a behavioral scientist not to remove the human back and we go back to underestimating the power of listening and learning from people. I will speak more in the discussion about tools that we could help us improve. Us as behavioral scientists from the region, we should and we have responsibility to work more on this. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I usually...
2 minutes, it's good, it's good.
Yes?
We've got 1 more minute.
1 more minute, I would just invite you because it was really
Like a
quick.
Canvas presentation, you know.
It was really quick. So we have a lot of results from different experiments that we've conducted and experiments that Arab behavioral scientists can kind of benefit from. So I invite you to read the report. We published a policy report with strategy but also an academic report that has more data for those that would like more to learn about the data science part. I thank my authors and the team behind this. So I'm just here to show you the results, but there's a big team behind this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This is so fun, and I've got so many notes because I need to jot everything, but we're going to stick to the questions. Don't worry. Can you all hear us fine if we're here? Great. So let's start with Rasha. What were the biggest surprises as you got the results or at the end of the project, and especially on how synthetic participants responded?
Thank you. Just like I showed in the data, especially when it came to asking the synthetic participants questions on climate, this is an area where synthetic participants performed less well in some particular topics around climate and the environment. The synthetic participants were more progressive than humans, but then in other areas, less so. So the unpredictability when it came to environment-related questions makes this particular policy area one that's not very maybe ready yet to be tested synthetically. It needs more work. But then the question poses itself is what policy areas are ready to lend themselves to synthetic testing versus the ones that are not ready. And climate is clearly one that's not ready yet. Yeah, so that's, and follow up to that, because then it connects with a point I'm going to raise with you, Fatima. Why do you think it's climate that is raising this backlash or this difficulty? Is it about this being controversial, perhaps, or I have a hypothesis based on research we've done in the lab, which I mentioned very quickly, but go for it.
So that's a great question, because for us, climate in the region, it's hasn't been a topic of conversation or of interest for as long as it has been in the Western world, and so it's almost divisive between the people that are very pro-environmental, pro-supporting, but then you have others that are potentially more skeptical. And because our data and our model reflects the UAE population, so I feel it's actually quite reflective of the fact that we still don't have a strong stance as to are we pro, against? So I guess it's just still very early stages.
Right, so it's novelty, controversiality. So we would say from behavioral science that it's also about the risk that some people may underestimate and some people may overestimate. And as a tie to, now I'm kind of coming to you, in the lab we just have very early work where we also created synthetic participants on an earlier study that we had already published on the UK and other 8 European countries' attitudes towards vaccine, but willingness to vaccinate. And this is a very controversial topic. In Europe, countries are very divided between Romania to Spain, Sweden, very, very different. And that's where similarity wasn't the magical 70%, it was between 5 and 35% similarity. So it's about, I wonder if there's something here for us to study about the extent to which this potential of synthetic participants is for issues that are consolidated. We know what's right, we're all on board, but for those, that's where maybe decision-making training would help, education helps. So that comes to you, Dan. What were the surprising factors in your research, and what worked well, and then we can tie to this discussion.
So there are some surprises, but some stuff that we also expected, and
Yeah.
we were happy to see.
Yeah.
So the first surprise is that actually it was able to predict. When we did this, we also did it on ChatGPT. We did it on a Western English-speaking content. So we didn't do it on LLM that is kind of related to UAE or to our culture. So we were kind of skeptical, and the big surprise that it's actually predicting. And when we saw the data, it wasn't like random things or everybody scoring 7 out of 10. We also saw some nice distribution of the data based on different demographics. And this was a surprise that, okay, things are advancing pretty quickly. Another surprise is when we saw the backfire effect in USA. So one of the things that we were also as behavioral scientists excited about is to see the treatment effect. We considered this study as a synthetic participant study, but also we ran 3 experiments and we wanted to see how did people would respond to these interventions. And the backfire effect in USA was quite interesting. And the big surprise that we maybe expected that ChatGPT cannot kind of replicate this or cannot predict behavioral spillovers. So in this case, we cannot predict how people would react to a social norm. So in this case, it crowded out human participants' responses.
Yeah. So this ties very well to the results that were presented yesterday by Iyad Rahon, if you were there, where we were talking about how the scary bit about the machine is that it complies much more than human. When you delegate something to somebody else, it's always going to make people, for example, a bit more dishonest. But if a human pushes back, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. Whereas LLM complies. And in that sense, because the comply was not to cheat, it was to do something good, then you really are at the mercy of what the prompt is, right? So this is super interesting. Now let's talk about how this can be used. So how do you see these results being used in government going forward?
Well, I wouldn't say synthetic participants would replace traditional methods, but I definitely think it's an excellent tool to be used above the traditional methods. So it's an excellent, low-cost, quick layer that we can add to our process to collect quick data, check sentiment, but also potentially shortlist, longer list of potential ideas that we can then go to trial with. So I wouldn't say it would replace traditional methods, but an excellent potential additional layer that we could use to our current policy.
An accelerator or pre-testing.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially in the early stages of policymaking.
Great.
No, I
in
think
international policy or? In
international policy, but also in applying behavioral science in the region. So maybe if we take a step back and we think as behavioral scientists, what do we offer? What do we do? We do so many things, but mainly behavioral diagnostic and a behavioral experiment. When we go to, in our case, in my context, to clients or to government officials and policymakers, we typically give them an option between a rapid diagnostic or a very thorough diagnostic with primary research. With this, I don't think rapid is on the table anymore. I think we have to use at least synthetic participants to help us get a direction on how people would behave. In behavioral experimentation, I think Rasha said it brilliantly. So it's actually going and testing early on how interventions or how treatment effects could kind of be predicted in using AI. But still, just maybe caveat here, I did my PhD in behavioral spillovers, and I know how different interventions could crowd out to do negative spillover effect. So this is something that also I'm mindful of, that I don't think we're ready yet to go and tell, in my case, the client that we're going to run synthetic participants and don't go to the field. And the third point, I don't know if it's going to come in the next question, but I'm keen on saying it now, is we have responsibility not to replicate. Now, maybe everybody's here in the room excited to replicate studies like this. Great, we need more replication, and we need more studies that could look at different policy areas. But what we have responsibility to do as behavioral scientists from the region is to do good research. I'm not saying best behavioral research, good attitudinal, good data sets, actual surveys that could help us understand the beliefs and perceptions of people from the region. So when weird, maybe, or non-weird context run similar studies, we want actually behaviors that could look or imitate our culture, our people, and our identity. And we're not here yet with the results we've seen with the negative and positive bias. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Was that?
I don't know.
Do you have a message to?
Yes,
you want to have any concluding remarks?
No, maybe on the concluding remark, I would just mention one thing, that when we started running when we started thinking about the methods, and this was a peer-reviewed paper, so we had like back and forth in terms of our methodology. It's not method, but it's more the philosophy, and I always discuss it with Fujan. So the philosophy was, before we wanted Rasha synthetic with Rasha human to predict. So I'm expecting Rasha human and Rasha synthetic to be predicted above 0.5. But then we took a step back again, and we're like, we're behavioral scientists. If I give Rasha the same survey again and again, she's not gonna. Once the team gave me a survey as part of the company, and I didn't respond the same way, and they're like, Fatima, you gave 2 different responses. So putting this behavioral kind of scientist on and knowing the biases, we then took another approach where we look at the aggregate, and I think you did the same, aggregate responses. But I wanted to just say this, to be mindful when using AI, really stay human and stay closer to humans too.
That is a very important message. And wait. Well, wait, you can applaud, of course. Now, do you have any concluding remarks? Any last thoughts or message?
So I'd say, the synthetic participants is an exceptionally exciting and interesting new avenue for which we can use behavioral science to push forward. For me, I think I would love to do a lot more testing. As behavioral scientists, we need to keep testing to see, will these findings hold? Will they stay true both across time and across different policy areas? Where I'm not saying that this is a full-fledged RCT or intuition, but it would position itself nicely in the middle, right? So testing to see how far these would hold.
Testing. So if you can summarize all of this, keep true to the RCT, where RCT for me also means 3 more things, not randomized control trial, but research. Yes. Do great research. Do great testing. Do great consulting, advising, and I think that's what is being facilitated here.
Open
and
the
publish
data
the
sets, publish the research. We've done so much in the region. I've done so much in the region. Everything is not there.
Publish data. And with that, it's been such a great pleasure to be with my 2 stars. Here's there are many other alums there, but here's the last and one of the first. And please join me in sending big thanks to both of them for a very inspiring talk.
Thank you.
We're going to be around if you have further questions about any of our work, research, lab program. Gosha is there. I don't know when we're going to be wrapping up for the next session, but we're here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can't shout. I know. So before you go, thank you so much. This is very cool, and I'm sure we're going to keep hearing much more about these methods. But do stay kind of like subscribed to the Blue Room, coolest room. We'll be back at 12:45 to hear from colleagues, people dear to my heart, about how to start a behavioral science unit, which, maybe I'll learn things. You can always learn. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Barbara.